Quite a while ago, I made a tweet about how these journalists are actually activists masquerading as journalists. And I'm going to compile a decent list of recent news to show you that, yes, in fact, journalism is dying or dead completely, and it's being replaced by activism for a variety of reasons. For one, most of the people who use Twitter and are verified are journalists. Twitter knows that they're driving the conversation and caters to them. Then, because of a variety of issues pertaining to how to gain followers, social media addiction, as well as activist infiltration, we then see journalists predominantly using the ability to produce news to target political enemies. Let's take a look at this first tweet from Rahim Kassam. He's the global editor-in-chief of Human Events. He says, BuzzFeed News is meddling in the UK's Europarl elections by mass reporting pro-Brexit accounts that they admit Twitter says are real people. They concocted a story about suspicious activity as a cover for their mass banning campaign. Electoral.com UK should investigate. He includes this image where it says, on Thursday, BuzzFeed News handed a sample of 30 of those accounts to Twitter. The next morning, Twitter had suspended 7 for breaching its policies. Here we can see how the one-directional nature of the activists in media work. They pretend to get quotes, and that's their way to get their political opponents banned. There's a lot more to go through, but before I do that, I want to ask you, if you'd like to support me, go to timcast.com/donate. There is a monthly donation option. There's a cryptocurrency option. I have a physical address. And if you don't want to do any of that, you can just share this video and click the like button, because apparently clicking the like button really does help. But back to the original tweet here from Rahim Kassam. At the bottom of the image, it then says, based on its internal tools, Twitter is confident that the accounts flagged by BuzzFeed News are those of real people in the UK, despite their seemingly suspicious activity. One of the things that frequently happens is that you'll see, Oliver Darcy of CNN, where he says it was media pressure that got Alex Jones banned. I don't see CNN targeting other outlets or other individuals for fake news. One of the points I've brought up in a rather comical fashion. If people want Alex Jones banned for being fake news, why do they allow Ancient Aliens? And I do mean this. It's kind of a funny thought, right? But if you're not familiar with Ancient Aliens, it's a show where they knowingly lie, because it's entertaining, about how the pyramids may have been built by aliens, and it's complete absurd nonsense. We've known for a while how pyramids have been built, how certain ancient technologies were developed. There's a lot of lost ancient technology because we've improved and changed the way we do things. But Ancient Aliens is a fun show. I certainly don't think it should be removed or banned, and a lot of people really enjoy it. But how come they talk about flat earthers on YouTube and say they need to be banned, but they don't talk about Ancient Aliens on cable television? To me, it shows that their bigger concern the bigger concern for many of these people is competition. We on YouTube are displacing them. Thus, they need a means to target their opponents. In this instance highlighted by Rahim, the issue is actually political, targeting pro-Brexit accounts. They handed over a bunch of accounts they think should be banned. The implied threat here is that BuzzFeed can leverage their audience to give bad press to Twitter unless Twitter takes action. Twitter then takes action. Don't take my word for it. Oliver Darcy of CNN said it was media pressure that got Twitter to ban Alex Jones. CNN ran a story about a group called Mafic Media. Mafic Media is half owned by Ruptly, which is funded by Russia Today, through the Russian government. CNN wrote the story and then waited until Facebook suspended Mafic Media, even though Mafic broke no rules, and then wrote their story saying Facebook has suspended a Russia-funded backed, millennial news outlet. The question I then posit, why don't they target Al Jazeera? Al Jazeera is funded by the government of Qatar. So this makes it painfully obvious that it's political. Now, it's entirely possible that CNN did this because they want to get ratings, and Russia is a hot topic. They've been doing Russiagate for years. But let's move on to some other examples. Here we have a tweet from just the other day. There's an image of a man making the OK hand gesture. David McDougall, he is a Scottish journalist in Finland, editor of News Now Finland, tweeted, "Hi Lisek, do you have a job? I wonder what your employers think of you making a sign that has been co-opted by the far right. Would be interested to find out, or maybe a future employer is interested." Rather strange thing for a journalist to post. threatening to contact an employer to cause harm to you because of something you're doing associated with politics. Is this the normal behavior of a journalist? No, it's not. These are activists. They are wearing suit and ties and they are working in media. And here we have someone presenting a veiled threat that they will try and take your job away from you because you've done a hand gesture. Now, in no way do I want to defend this weird guy doing the okay hand gesture. I don't know who this is. Apparently, he's maybe a bad person. The issue isn't anything to do with the individuals, but more so the behavior of the journalists. We can see another tweet from David McDougall where he says, I don't know if these people have jobs, but I wonder what their employers would think about them making signs that are closely associated with you know who. What's the point he's trying to make? Another tweet, a third tweet, he says, I wonder what his employers would think. It's a longer tweet. It says a lot about Finland, but he ends by wonder what his employers would think. Here's what I can only surmise. Highlighting someone's job to them. Do you have a job? I wonder what your employer would think. Is that not a veiled threat? When he says, I wonder what their employers would think in the following tweets, it sounds like it's a call to action for his 14,000 followers to do something. So here we can see actual behavior from a verified Twitter user encouraging some kind of behavior or actually making veiled threats. But we'll move on. I have many more examples. This may be a long video. This article from Buzzfeed is misplaced. We'll come back to it in a second. This is a story from Pointer, which shows that it's poorly formatted, but the journalists are the largest, most active verified group on Twitter. The reason I highlight this is just to very quickly, before we move on, to show you the amount of leverage that journalists have over Twitter. I think this could lend itself to the idea it's possible. Activists have purposefully entered journalism knowing that they will have leverage over public spheres of influence. It's also more likely, much, much more likely in my opinion, that it's not so much a left-wing conspiratorial activist thing, more so that these journalists are being radicalized by the spheres on Twitter and social media addiction, but also they've found a quick path to followers. By promoting more radical hot takes and far left propaganda and these ideas, targeting people like Dave Rubin, etc., they gain followers from outraged groups. Because they're the largest group of Twitter users, they can then pressure Twitter to take action, and they have. In this story from the Daily Wire, talking about the Learn to Code meme, they talk about how NBC reporter Ben Collins suggested the meme was an ingenious cover story of highlighting journalistic softness with Learn to Code, then expected cruelty underneath. The issue here is actually that Ben Collins' personal friends at NBC were being targeted. So he quoted a far-left activist in the story as if it's fact, and this is a common technique we see among these individuals. They will act like far-left activists are authorities on certain issues and platform them to give them credence, but also to shape a narrative. The narrative being that Learn to Code was some kind of extremely, nefarious far-right thing, when in reality, it was just kind of a meme. It wasn't necessarily conservative, though it was used by many conservatives. Learn to Code was meant to poke fun at how journalists hold disdain for the working class individuals, namely coal miners, who would lose their jobs, and then many stories were run saying, Learn to Code. John Levine said, I am told by a person in the know that tweeting Learn to Code at any recently laid off journalist will be treated as abusive behavior and is a violation of Twitter's terms of service. However, many journalists then jumped to the defense of Twitter and claimed this was fake news. But in fact, it was true. Some of these tweets have since been deleted. When it was uncovered, actually admitted that Jack Dorsey said, perhaps we were too aggressive in banning some accounts. The point I'm bringing up here is how factual information that people who were tweeting Learn to Code were being removed wrongly. Journalists rushed to the defense of the activists and other journalists to protect them from criticism, putting pressure on Twitter. And I think this shows that they understand the power and influence they hold working in media, and they're using it to personally advantage themselves. But let's move on to another couple examples. Here we have a tweet from Mark D. Stefano, highlighting the fact that Tommy, I'm not going to say this individual's name because YouTube will absolutely just derank my content, so I'm going to avoid saying too much. But Mark D. Stefano is targeting a certain personality in the UK, and the example here is how they claim to be journalists, but they repeatedly highlight specific actions by certain individuals and then demand action. And when they don't get it, they are actually rather outraged or angered. In one instance, posting a reaction meme shrugging, why aren't they doing what I want them to do? and then quoting people saying YouTube are a complete disgrace. Clearly, we can see what they're trying to make happen. Next, we have the story of Joe Bernstein, who wrote a negative story about a 14-year-old on YouTube. Once again, Joe Bernstein has tweeted things in the past. He's apologized for it. I recognize that. But he's shown himself to be aligned with the politically activist left. So these are more simple examples, but we'll move on very quickly. We can see Mark DiStefano is very, very actively targeting specific YouTubers. And I have to wonder why. If you're somebody who covers specific topics, I can understand that. But to go after individuals and do this, they do this thing where, Oliver Darcy, for instance, we'll move on to Oliver. He says something to the effect of, I'm just asking questions. I'm just reporting on it. And at a certain point, that's okay, right? Yes, absolutely. There was an instance where I reached out to Patreon about a comment on a far left Patreon account, and then he immediately banned them. I realized the danger of giving out names of specific accounts, and I no longer do it. However, what this uncovers is the absolute exploit in that these people in media know by pointing this out, these people will get banned. But they do it anyway. In fact, they wield it on purpose. We can then see the direction that Oliver Darcy takes. Is Oliver Darcy a reporter? Absolutely not. Though he may have been in the past, he absolutely isn't. And I'll stress this too. I don't think he ever really was. If you do a search on Oliver Darcy's history, you'll find that he was actually a staunch conservative who made gotcha videos. They've since been deleted. He then went to work for Business Insider, where he actually interviewed me about my position resisting censorship. Later, he goes on to be one of the principal actors pushing for censorship. Sounds to me like he doesn't actually have principles. He's looking for a quick exit. So he tweeted this. 2 years ago this week, Fox published its Seth Rich story. After it fell apart, Fox said it would investigate what happened. It's unclear whatever became of that probe. The results were never announced. Neither was any disciplinary action for those responsible. Excuse me. He goes on to say related, and it's a link to Matthew Gertz. Someone responds with pot kettle, and I would agree. Oliver Darcy doesn't highlight wrongdoing in media. He specifically targets InfoWars and Fox News. And by all means, I have repeatedly criticized InfoWars. I have repeatedly, made light or made fun of Alex Jones's ranting about extra dimensional aliens or people doing drugs. And I have also reported on Fox News retracting conspiracies and other such things. But curious then why Oliver Darcy as a media reporter doesn't focus on other scandals at other media outlets, namely the president of Now This News giving a presentation in California saying that they've brought in anti-Trump activists to the highest levels. Another example of journalism becoming an activist haven. Now This News is generating a lot of hits on Facebook. I don't know where they're at now, but it's a well-funded venture. And now this president said on the stage at VidCon that they've brought in anti-Trump activists. Curious why that's not an issue for Oliver Darcy and CNN. Curious why other big scandals and retractions aren't a big story. Now they claim sometimes, oh no, we do cover these things. Not really. Let me point this out. One of the things that I've repeatedly brought up, this is a good example of the hypocrisy of CNN, as well as action taken by a reporter in activist means. What you're looking at now is a website called NewsDiffs, or for those that aren't looking or only listening, what NewsDiffs does is shows you previous versions of articles that have been changed and how they've been changed. I'm not sure if this site is still active, but what we see here is a story called The Life and Death of the Seth Rich Conspiracy Theory from the Washington Post, changelog. We can see the story was originally published May 24th, 2017 at 10:24 a.m., but strangely was edited in November of that year. What happened so that 6 months after the story was written, they had to make changes? Well, the truth is, it would seem that the original story was fake. What the writer, David Weigel, claimed was that he believed, based on no evidence, Kim.com, the famous hacker and founder of Mega, was trying to hack into the email account of Seth Rich to plant emails. Seth Rich, of course, was a former DNC staffer who lost his life. There was a conspiracy about him being the source for WikiLeaks, though it's very contentious with people saying it is or it isn't. And the mainstream, official narrative, there's no real evidence to suggest that. However, what you're seeing now, or I can explain to you, are the changes made. The changes to the story alter it from being about a hacker in New Zealand trying to break into Rich's email to someone maybe trying to do it. Essentially, what it appears happened is that the story was published. It was pushed out by many journalists, a narrative that someone was trying to fake a conspiracy theory. Why? Curious, why? Why did they need to write a fake news story making it seem like the Seth Rich conspiracy theory was propped up by individuals faking it? But then several months later, in November, altered the article to remove much of the evidence. In fact, the article does not, you can see here, check it out. Nowhere in the revision do you see update or correction. No. It was changed 6 months later. Think about what that means. Let's say you read this story. You shared it with your friends. You spread the lie. They all believed it. 6 months later, they cover up their tracks and they don't post a correction notice. The average person would come back to this and just think maybe they got it wrong. There's no log. Fortunately, we have the website NewsDiff to prove. In fact, Washington Post altered a story several months later, 6 months later, and buried a lot of the evidence. In fact, I find this whole thing to be very, very strange, but indicative of the behaviors of people who work in media and how they seek to push political agendas. We have this story from Oliver Darcy, which I think we've talked about Oliver enough. It says, Facebook touts fight on fake news, but struggles to explain why InfoWars isn't banned. At the same rate, I would ask why Ancient Aliens and other obviously fake news, videos aren't banned. Who gets to be the arbiter of truth? In this instance, it appears that Oliver Darcy, if I was to do like an analysis of his actions, it's mostly an easy target. He knows that his tribe doesn't like InfoWars, so he can point, the finger at them while ignoring stories like what the Washington Post did. And yes, I'm pretty sure he knows about this. Many people know about what the Washington Post did, and I've actually gotten some other journalists to apologize for it and correct the record after the fact, not realizing they had been duped. Journalism does still exist, let me stress, but activists are taking a massive step in pushing forward. Now, what we have here is probably the best and most recent example of how activists are working in journalism specifically for political means. This is a Twitter thread from Nick Monroe. Far left media cowards deplatform Dave Rubin from Buttigieg interview. While I certainly don't want to use the word cowards, I think it's a bit hyperbolic and unnecessary to convey the ideas. Essentially what happened, however, is that Dave Rubin reached out to Chris Meagher, who is I believe he's the press secretary or manager for Pete Buttigieg, who actually responded to Dave with DM me. Would sound that they were interested in doing an interview on the Rubin report. However, a journalist from the Huffington Post, Media Matters is an activist organization, so we'll skip over him, but we have the Huffington Post, we have the Young Turks, we have, this is just another activist, we have an individual who appears to be just another, I'm not sure who this person is, it's a pop culture and politics, we have a person who's an author, Occupy Democrats. So many of these people are in fact actually activists, but we can see we've got Huffington Post, the Young Turks, we have Ben Collins once again popping up, trying to deplatform Pete Buttigieg from Dave's show, and Ben Collins works for NBC News. Now, in no uncertain terms, Ben Collins is an activist. He produced a fake news piece citing another far-left activist as a source. This is not journalism. It is not how you are supposed to accurately report information. And here we have him tweeting negative information about Dave Rubin, and this is a tactic, right? So this is something they do that allows them to effectively mask their activities. He claims, I'm just reporting it, but in fact, it's more slamming Pete Buttigieg for daring to consider this interview. I will also stress, what eventually happened. Let me continue. We also have a Vox reporter, Carlos Maza, who also called it absolute madness that they would consider going on Dave Rubin's show. Here we can see many people who work in media are actually aligned with far-left activists and doing their best to put pressure on people for political ends. What's the problem if Dave Rubin interviews Pete Buttigieg? And I'll stress, Pete Buttigieg apparently pulled out. According to Dave, if Pete Buttigieg cannot take the heat from some activists on Twitter, then he will never be able to defeat Trump. I'm sorry. Tulsi Gabbard, Andrew Yang, Bernie Sanders have gone on Fox News. Yang and Tulsi have gone on Rogan. They're willing to stand up and actually speak on principle. Of course, the machine doesn't necessarily like that. And if Buttigieg went on some certain channels, then maybe the activists within media would cause him harm. This is Pete Buttigieg bending the knee, and this is the power of activists in media and how it's harmful to our discourse. Why should we care about a Vox reporter calling something absolute madness? In fact, why would journalists try to stop something from happening? You'd think journalists would encourage the interaction, and then they could highlight information and carry on with their stories. However, it ultimately ended up with Dave Rubin saying that essentially it's done. Media Matters, Vox, Huffington Post, they lobbied Pete Buttigieg not to do his show, and it worked. I've got a couple of other tweets. We have Bridget Fatassi making the point, made the point I kind of just said, but I wanted to highlight her statement that if Pete Buttigieg thinks he can beat Donald Trump, the emperor of all trolls, but caves to pressure from random blue checks, he's already toast. Now I want to move on to one last thought on the repercussions. Hopefully what I've shown you is not an exhaustive list, but we can see here how activists absolutely do work in media, how they manipulate articles, how they lie, how they cheat, how they smear, and they do it for political means, they do it for monetary means. We can see how they would even go back and alter a story 6 months later to cover their tracks. This is the current state of media. But now we have this, the final thought. Confirmation from The Guardian that a certain individual has been banned from Facebook and Instagram. Great to see the rules applied. I can't name this individual, unfortunately, because YouTube will absolutely just derank my channel for mentioning his name. But this is from Mike Stuchberry, who was cheering for censorship. We then later saw Mike Stuchberry shocked to find that even he could not talk about it. And that's the end result of censorship. You create rules, the rules will be used against you. But I'll leave it at that. Ultimately, the point here and our final thought on the matter is that, yes, activists are in media. The greatest example is from Raheem Kassam, how what Buzzfeed did was they took accounts they wanted to get banned, brought them to Twitter and said, why won't you ban these people? And sure enough, many of them got banned. I don't see BuzzFeed News doing the same for the far left. I don't see BuzzFeed News targeting Antifa or other accounts. In fact, there are many journalists completely aligned with Antifa who produce fake news and lie. And I know who they are. But you know what? They're allowed to lie. They are. It's the First Amendment. It's just a huge problem for discourse, and it's going to cause a complete and total breakdown. So I'll end it here. Thanks for hanging out. I will have more videos on my second channel, youtube.com/TimCastNews, starting at 6 p.m., then 6:30, then 7. And all of this content will be appearing, presumably, on it will be on iTunes, Spotify, Google, etc. as a podcast audio version for those that aren't aware. If you want to support the video, you can go to timcast.com/donate to help me out. Donate monthly, cryptocurrency, and I have a physical address. Share the video, click the like button, it really helps. Or just spread the word. I'm not really sure how you promote podcasts, but on YouTube, it's very reliant on the algorithm, which is why it's very dangerous to say certain names and use certain words. But we'll leave it there. Thanks for hanging out, and I will see you all at 6 p.m., youtube.com/TimCastNews. Or if you're listening to the podcast, just stick around. More coming soon.